What's up, y'all? It's BigBossFabo, man. BigBossFabo back with a video for the channel, man. I'm actually doing a reaction to Neil deGrasse Tyson schooling Joe Rogan on Africa's greatness. Neil deGrasse Tyson schooling Joe Rogan on this, and in today's video, he will be actually discussing and reacting to the greatness of Africans. They talk about how it's the most diverse continent on the planet, and there's so much to find there. What are your thoughts on Africa? Man, the thing about Africa, right? So I'm second generation. It's funny because the whole differentiation between first generation, second generation, and like African American. Are you a first generation African, or is that like I was doing a lot of research because there's a lot of sticklers out there, man. They going, oh, you didn't get the terminology correct. You didn't, you got to be real definitive with what you're saying. So with that being said, essentially both of my parents are African immigrants. They're born in Africa. You know what I mean? Congo, the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, that's Central Africa, is where my lineage lies. Tied into Angola, like on my mom's side, she does have bloodline tied to Angola as well. Congo, Angola, two different countries in Africa, bro. A lot of people don't know anything about Africa. You know, in mainstream America, the media tends to paint a certain picture about Africa. Little do we know, it's all a cover up. You know what I mean? Like the poverty that is pretty much emphasized. In all actuality, there's a lot of poverty. There's poverty and war going on, but on all actuality, a certain narrative is painted on Africa that it's all safaris, jungle land, huts, but it's not. There's a lot of development, a lot of infrastructure, especially in some of the major cities, right? With that being said, Congo is probably one of the richest countries in terms of natural resources. A lot of people don't know that. I think it produces a lot of coltan, which is actually a mineral that's used in a lot of things like tech. You know what I mean? iPhones, laptops, things of that nature. And I also believe my uncle had mentioned to me that Australia and Congo are probably two of the biggest producers of coltan, which is a high invested mineral. So, I mean, there's a lot of resources. So coltan is a short columbite tantalite, a dull metallic ore. It's a heat-resistant powder, metallic tantalum, unique properties for storing electrical charge. So batteries, things like that, coltan is used. So a lot of foreigners will come to Africa just to, pretty much manipulate and try to control the people there for their resources. I mean, if we look at the slave trade, that's what it was for. People were exploring and visiting, but when you go to Africa, you find out there's a lot of resources, minerals, things like that. You're going to start mining there. Right. And then the slave trade happened to where they kind of exported the people as well. You have slavery. You have people coming over to America being first generation, essentially. So that's a quick rundown, man. I just think that there's a lot of things that are overcast and not overlooked in terms of Africa. I think a lot of exposure needs to be brought to Africa as a whole. So many different people don't even know about countries in Africa. They just think Africa is Africa. A lot of people need to educate themselves on it, but why would you want to when you don't really care to? That's just kind of the nature of America. We're all about us here, but I do believe that the world as a whole, like if you believe in Pangea and things like that, I think at one point, there was tectonic separation, as they mention it, to where everything was whole at once. And a lot of origins come from Africa. So this video is going to give some insight. Neil deGrasse Tyson, a very educated individual. Joe Rogan, we know from his entertainment background, has the podcast stuff now, coming from fighting and stuff like that, or the UFC realm, announcing and things like that. But has very educated conversations on the platform. So I'm glad to see that he was open to kind of have this conversation. I think this is a fairly older video, or it says 4 months ago, but it's dropped on Africa Info Hub. But, this is the first time I've tapped into content like this, but a lot of this stuff needs to have that veil unveiled. You know what I'm saying? We need to kind of look at these type of things.
There's a section here on race and color, which is another thing with the variation of what we have in the world. Just a point I want to make. When European anthropologists started running through Africa and started describing what they saw, their urge was to say, everyone in Africa is this thing, and they have dark skin, woolly hair, and that is a thing. And they called it a race, and they called it the Negroes, okay? Mm-hmm. And this is our attempt to classify into few categories something that might actually, in real life, be on a spectrum. We know that the human species began in Africa. And everybody who populates everywhere else in the world came out of Africa to do that.
You know what's funny? That people to this day, there's some folks that believe that people originated in America. You know what I'm saying? People are in such denial about certain things that are obvious through science and the studies. You know what I mean? That even biological facts that are argued, people still living in delusion to where they can't understand these type of things.
What that tells you is that the genetic diversity within Africa as the origin of our species is greater than it is between any other two people anywhere else in the world. But because the anthropologists were not thinking genetic diversity, they're thinking skin color. They put them all in one bin. But if you have the most genetic diversity, then in practically every way humans vary, you would find the extreme of that in the African continent. Where would you find the tallest people in the world? Watusi tribe of Africa. How about the shortest people in the world?
Pygmies.
The Pygmies. Not even that far away.
Right.
Geographically. They have the same skin color, so the Europeans said these are one group of people, one race. Where might you find the slowest people in the world? Well, no one looks for them. Where would you find? There's no races to find the slowest.
And kind of like back in those times, people weren't thinking outside the box. You know, ignorance was bliss. You know, like ignorance in full effect. So I don't think they were that sharp to understand. Like they just was looking at color. Oh man, they was probably thinking, man, they're short, they're tall. They didn't understand the biological complexity, or in terms from a genetic standpoint. You know what I mean? And I can't really fault them for that. Over time, we can educate ourselves, and history teaches us certain things, and we're able to look at, you know, geographical information from different areas across the globe and do analysis and comparison. But they didn't have no type of technology. So honestly, they were just operating in ignorance is what I believe.
Slowest people. How about the fastest people?
They weren't taking time to understand.
Okay. People of African. How about the fastest people? Africa. Okay. People of African descent have dominated the long distance as well as the sprint. Two completely different physical abilities. Oh, but they're all dark-skinned people. They're all Negroes. Okay. Where would you likely find the dumbest person in the world? Africa. How about the smartest person in the world? Africa.
How about the Egyptians?
The Europeans did not look for people smarter than they were. Okay? And to this day, where they find evidence where that might have been the case, you have people saying aliens did it. Egypt is, of course, in Africa.
Yeah.
A brilliant civilization. Oh my gosh. While Europeans were still either disemboweling heretics or whatever the hell they were doing, even before that, thousands of years ago. So my point is, if you don't look for it and you don't find it and you're going to create a map of humans of the world, you're going to put yourself at the top.
Facts.
That's what you're going to do. And you're going to
If you don't look for it, you ain't going to find it. So you know what comes after that? Assumptions. Oh, I didn't encounter it, so this is how it must be based off my personal experience and what I experienced. You know what I mean? So that's how the narrative got ran with. It's very unfortunate.
Things like this. Who do you want to hear from? Thomas Jefferson or Francis Galton?
Jefferson.
Jefferson, 1785. Speaking of the Negroes, comparing them by their faculties of memory, reason, and imagination, it appears to me that in memory, they are equal to the whites. In reason, much inferior, as I think one could scarcely be found capable of tracing and comprehending the investigations of Euclid. And in imagination, they are dull, tasteless, and anomalous.
What is Euclid?
I honestly don't know how many Euclid-fluent white people Jefferson knew in the original American colonies. Euclid invented geometry. Okay, Euclidean geometry is ancient Greece. And his books still exist to this day. So he's saying the black slaves don't know Euclid, can't figure out Euclid.
Well, they haven't been educated.
Well, regardless,
The whole
how
thing is so
many
ridiculous.
white farmers in 1785 USA
Also.
knew Euclid?
Yeah,
No.
zero.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a matter of pointing the finger. Oh, they don't know this. Okay, do you? No. I want to go back to a point he had mentioned. He mentioned something about they're saying.
I honestly don't. Anomalous.
What is
imagination? They are dull creations
here.
of Euclid. And in imagination, they are dull, tasteless, and anomalous.
What is
Okay, so you're Thomas Jefferson, right? Back in the day where he's writing this information was in the midst of slave trade, right? So you're talking about they're dull, unimaginable, useless.
imagination? They are dull, tasteless, and anomalous.
what is
Dull, tasteless, anomalous. So think about this. You extradite a people from a different continent. You bring them into a place where they don't even speak your language. How are you able to assess if somebody is imaginative? How are you able to assess if they're dull or not? You can't even speak to them. You know what I mean? There's a communication boundary there. You can't even understand them. It's like me going to Spain or going to Latin America, right? I go to Latin America and think I will understand all the mannerisms and, you know, how they convey themselves and how in their culture they tend to do things. You can't. It's just crazy. It's ludicrous to tell me that, you know, people took this information and ran with it and said, you know, we must believe it, but it's true. Like, that's such small-minded thinking to think that you bring someone from a different background and culture into your culture and you think you can assess them the way you assess people in your culture. That is clown world to me, bruh.
Euclid?
White people Jefferson knew in the original
That is clown
American
world.
colonies. Euclid invented geometry. Okay, Euclidean geometry is ancient Greece. And his books still exist to this day. So he's saying the black slaves don't know Euclid, can't figure out Euclid.
Well, they haven't been educated.
Well, regardless,
The whole
how
thing is so
many
ridiculous.
white farmers in 1785 USA
Also.
knew Euclid?
Yeah,
No.
zero.
Okay. Okay. But whatever were his observations and objections to black people, he had no hesitation continually mating with at least one of them,
Fact.
producing 6 children. So you know what I did here? Then there's a guy who wrote a whole book comparing black people and white people, a book that was used into the 1960s. It was called The Origin of Races by Carlton Kuhn. He wrote, if Africa
Damn.
was the cradle of mankind, which he recognizes, it was only an indifferent kindergarten. Europe and Asia were our principal schools. So these are people putting themselves at the top. He's white, so he's got to put white people at the top. Then I thought, suppose anthropologists were black racists instead of white racists. What would they write? What would they come up with?
Well, also what he's saying is ridiculous because
Exactly.
if it's kindergarten, how did they do the pyramids? It's the most complex structures ever known to man.
Hold on.
So
So
we can't reproduce today.
no.
You see what I'm saying? It's like there's blatant points and facts out there that if you use common sense and critical thinking, it's a no-brainer. To this day, people don't understand how the pyramids were able to be developed and formed, and they still haven't been able to be recreated in the same facet that the original pyramids were produced in. You know what I mean? With technology not even being a thing back then, and Africa being such a dumb continent, man, y'all are kindergartners, while Europe, Asia, we're the principals, man. I don't see any complex structures to the height of pyramids, which are cultivated in Egypt, in any of those other continents, man. What are you talking about? What are you saying? It's common sense, bro. 1 + 1 = 2. It's not rocket science. So whether people want to take time to investigate the complexity of Africa, African culture throughout the different countries. People are naturally selfish. People are naturally, essentially, just self-centered. So I don't, just in the sense that I don't think people are going to take time out to do the research. People are going to do it if they care to. But if you don't care to, you want to remain ignorant to certain things, that's how it's going to remain. And we see a majority of people are like that. They tend to focus on what they want to focus on. But the only issue I have is when people push a narrative to the masses and they're misinforming people about things. There's so much misinformation out there about Africa, about black people in general, about African people. And I think that's why there's so much confusion amongst the community, inner city communities, why black Americans don't really associate with Africans, like Africans who immigrate to this country. There's a huge contention with black Americans. Like there's always a combative nature, and it's real messy. But people need to really peel back the layers, man. There's a lot going on.
All of it's ridiculous.
My only point is, when you have that mindset and you have to put yourself at the top, and all people with dark skin are one entity, you're not looking for people smarter than you. You're not. There's other evidence here. Do you realize that the people who get the highest scores on standardized tests in England are people, immigrants from the Igbo tribe in Nigeria? And their kids outscore all the quote native white people in the town. If you're not looking for them, you're not finding them. It just doesn't. It's a thing. It's all here in this chapter, and all I'm doing is bringing science to it. That's all I'm doing here.
What do you?
You know, Africa has a lot of what's it called? Always, you know, people tend to be coerced into things, man. There's a lot of manipulation, and the other word in terms of why can't I think of this word, man? I was having this conversation the other day with my family, and I was trying to bring this word up, and it wasn't coming to mind. Basically, there's a word. It's corruption. Corruption. That's the word. There's a lot of corruption in Africa. You know, there's wars and, you know, a lot of stuff going on to this day, you know, but it's all about political power and people being corrupted to do things for, you know, essentially white America. You know what I mean? A lot of African political heads and figures have been manipulated into pretty much backstabbing their own people for monetary gain and value, for power. And that's why Africa has been in a rut, because people don't know how to come together there. You know, education isn't there to where people can think for themselves. They want to be dependent on others. They look to others. And that's kind of why, you know, I'm not going to say it's a sinking ship, but I mean, it's hurting, you know, with that being said. That's why I wanted to react to I'm going to start doing content like this, because if I have a platform, why not use it to open people's eyes or give insight to things people have no idea about. So I'm going to use this platform for that, you know, and God willing, if I get to a place, you know, God willing, when I like to speak things into fruition, when I get to a place to where I can really be of help and be very resourceful, you know, I'm definitely going to try to invoke change in Africa, man. And these type of conversations and stuff like that, let's be honest, these type of conversations can get you in trouble. Like, people don't like to talk about the things that are swept under the rug. They're swept under the rug for a reason. Keep quiet. Like, don't talk about these things. But I'm going to speak truth, you know what I'm saying? Much love to everybody who tends to take time out to understand where other people are coming from versus just being one-sided and in their own mind, in their own lane. So, yeah, man, a lot of good information here. Shout out to Joe Rogan. Seemed like he was taking a lot of value into what Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about. So yeah, man, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section below, man. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Much love to everybody. Shout out Africa. Shout out America, man. Shout out people. I'm not a one-sided dude. That's another thing, man. I want to cover these topics to bring awareness to certain things, but additionally, I'm not a person that just hate people. Like, a lot of people have done wrong to me personally, and we've seen throughout history people doing wrong to other people. But I support good people, to be honest. that's just where my heart lies. I don't care about what color you are, man. I'm not gonna sit here and be like I'm a black supremacist. No, I mean, no, not at all. You know what I'm saying? I'm about peace and love, and I'm about honesty and truth. But if they're gonna run with a narrative, people want to tell a story about Africa. Africa's this way. Africans are, you know what I'm saying? The stereotypes. Then that's just a lie. That's just a lie. People need to really open their eyes. But hey, we'll catch you guys in the next video. We out.